Hi. Um, we're going to be doing the first Roman Empire video. This is under Roman Empire 1. Next will be Roman Empire 2 and the Roman art video. Super fun. I know you're just going to love Roman art. Um, and that video. And then we'll talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Dark Ages. And then, golly gosh, we're in the home stretch after that, you know? Yeah, this is video 15. Crazy, huh? And for all of you out there uh, trying to watch these in one night, why? Why? Don't do that. That was a bad idea. I didn't even record them all in one day. Certainly can't watch them all in one day. I mean, I guess if you have a cold and you got nothing else to do, you might be able to fit them in. But you're not going to remember anything. So, anyway. Okay, Roman Empire 1. First thing to talk about, and this says Roman Empire 1, but it's not like there's a sequel. This is the first Roman Empire video. There's not more than one Roman Empire. Sort of. There kind of is. I'll talk about that later. Um, okay, Roman Empire 1. The Roman Empire lasts from about 30 BCE to 476. I can give you a fairly precise date there, and I'll talk about why when we get to uh, the fall of the Roman Empire, which will take a little while. Anyway, um, anyway though, okay. So in the beginning of the empire, in 27 BCE, the Senate, intimidated in cooperation with Octavian, who you should know from the last video, now calling himself Augustus Caesar, basically gives away the score. Okay, now what does that mean? Um, what do I mean by that? Well, okay, so Octavian declared himself Princeps, Princeps, Princeps. Hard C sound because it's Latin. Um, he declared himself Princeps, or first citizen of Rome, but he maintained the pretense that he was just a guy, that he was just, he's like, I'm just a guy. I'm just the first citizen, and all our citizens, have these same rights and whatnot. Anyway, what had actually happened was, effectively, the powers of different offices were all pulled in to Octavian, or Augustus Caesar, as he was calling himself now. Um, his stage name or whatever. Um, um, the various powers of the different offices were sort of assumed by Augustus. Here's an analogy. Imagine that there's a president, and, well, he's not a regular president. Imagine there's a military coup, and there's a guy who declares himself president. Um, and then the president starts stepping in and doing things that are supposed to be the stuff done by governors of various states or mayors of various cities. He's making decisions that are not really in the president's purview. And this guy and the people who could stop him or who are supposed to stop him just let him get away with it. He sort of appropriates those powers to himself. That's what was going on with Augustus. Augustus appropriated the powers of various offices to himself. Um, he also started using a title. This is where the whole emperor thing comes from. He started using a title that was reserved for people who had won a foreign military victory. This title was Imperator. 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 He wanted to emphasize the fact that he had beaten Mark Antony, who was the great general. Uh, and honestly, Octavian's victory over Antony mostly has to do with one of his top lieutenants, um, but that's neither here nor there. Um, anyway, but he wanted to boost his military cred because he was never perceived as the most military guy, and the Romans were really into military victories. As I said in the previous video, the Romans were good at two things. They were good at scabbing people and building things. And if you were a scabby person, if you had a lot of scabby victories as a military person, they liked you a lot. Um, so anyway, Augustus Augustus started using the title of Imperator, which became Emperor, and it just sort of became a title that everybody who ruled as first citizen used until it just became the title for what was going on. So in a way, the Senate. It's not that the Senate gave him the power, but the Senate let him take the power, if you will. They didn't stop him. Um, so anyway, so that's where the Roman Empire begins. Augustus is the first emperor of Rome. Now, the funny thing about this, so okay, Augustus Caesar is the first emperor of Rome, and from here on out, the place looks like a republic with all the laws and institutions and such, but is really an autocracy. So, um, the funny thing about it is that what Augustus, what part of his political genius was that he didn't just come in and abolish all of the laws of Rome, or he didn't abolish the 12 tables. He didn't upend everything right away. Yes, he was running everything. His word was law. He was ruling as an autocrat. But for the common person on the sort of day to day on the ground, um, their lives wouldn't change too much. There were still the entire range of officials that everyday people interacted with, the magistrates and the censors and the aediles and all of those people, all the various elected offices all the way up. The thing is, so these people were still, to the regular person uh, who was living in Rome during this time, Rome was no longer effectively a republic, and the rule of law had been completely subverted. But for all practical purposes, for most people, day-to-day life went on pretty much as it always had. Now, one key thing here is that the elected officials in these lower offices, if Augustus didn't want you elected, you weren't going to get elected. That was just how it worked. Um, because he had all the power at that point. So there were still the appearance of Republican offices. There was still the appearance of a functioning republic, but it was not actually working as a republic should. The Senate did anything that Augustus wanted. The people in lower offices were only people that Augustus approved of and wanted to get elected, and so on and so forth. Okay, so, what was that like? Well, I just told you what it was like for everyday people, but let's expand our focus a little bit. So during Augustus's life, things were pretty peaceful, and for a little while after that, a few hundred years after that, in fact, things were mostly stable. This was called the Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome. Um, Again, Julius Caesar, his adopted father, Augustus put forth a lot of reforms of the laws, and he made things better for the common people in a lot of ways. He was a genius politician, and he knew that he needed the common people on his side, because otherwise there would be revolts and things like that, and it would get ugly. Um, so Augustus was able to create a pretty stable Rome that still looked like a functioning republic. And his successors, the emperors who came after him for quite some time, were mostly pretty capable and fairly boring people who maintained the appearance of a republic and maintained a fairly stable rule. There were a few bad ones here and there, but most of them just kept up the Augustan policies, and things were pretty stable. The empire grew during this period. It reached its largest extents, to the point where it had Spain, it had all of France, part of what we would now call Germany. It had a good portion of what we would now call England. Um, it took over Egypt and turned Egypt into just another province of Rome, and it conquered all of the eastern Mediterranean lands like Syria and Palestine and Lebanon and places like that, to the point where it got to the point where every inch of coastline along the Mediterranean Sea was Roman. There was literally nowhere on the Mediterranean you could go and put into port that wasn't Roman, which is pretty impressive. Historians say that they turned the Mediterranean into a Roman pond or a Roman lake, which is remarkable. No one had ever done that. No one has done it since either. Rome had a staggeringly massive empire, and it was tremendously wealthy. And during this period, during the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome. Um, so everything's going great, right? This emperor stuff isn't working out so bad. Sure, he's an autocrat, and the emperors see themselves as gods, but, you know, it's working. It's fine, right? This is going to be okay. Well, everything has to hit a bad point. And that bad point is called, in Roman history, is called the crisis of the 3rd century. Now, remember, the 3rd century, we're now into CE, or what used to be called AD. Um, the crisis of the 3rd century, that would be in the 200s, and spilling over a little bit into the early 300s. So the 3rd century is the 200s, spills over a little bit into the 300s. The crisis of the 3rd century, stuff got bad, y'all. The stability of the empire succumbed to the inherent instability of autocracy. The problem is with autocracy is that if one person has all the power, everything depends on that person being relatively capable and sane. Now, during the Pax Romana, there were some pretty goofy emperors. There were some people who weren't altogether there. Um, Nero was an emperor during the Pax Romana, and he's generally not regarded as a very good emperor. Um, Spent a lot of money, wasted a lot of money. He's emperor, he could do that. Caligula was an emperor during the early years of the Pax Romana, and he's generally regarded as fully nuts. He was just banana pants. Um, but overall, the institutions that had been created by Augustus and maintained by most of his successors were still holding on. These were not Republican institutions, but they were institutions nonetheless, and they were still hanging on. The problem is, eventually, in an autocracy, though, you're going to get somebody who just isn't working out, who's just, things are going to get bad. Um, Primarily because there's no way that respects the rule of law for power to transition. Either the emperor picks an heir and that person gets power, or there's fighting about who gets the power when there's time for a new emperor. Um, and that's not how Rome was designed to function. Rome, when the Romans created the Republic, again, they created a republican system that was governed by the rule of law and the peaceful transference of power. They had elections. The consuls, which were like presidents, the consuls were elected to office. They governed in a way that was restricted by the Constitution of Rome, the 12 Tables, and then when their term was over, they stepped down and handed over power to the next consuls elected. That was how it worked. Um, but once you've given up on the rule of law and you have autocrats running everything, the only way to get an autocrat out of office, if he doesn't just die on his own, the only way to get an autocrat out of office is to friggin' murder him. Um, and that's gonna happen eventually. With the rule of law undermined, fundamentally, the institutions that were supposed to separate power among a lot of different offices and prevent, well, sorry, the other nice thing about the Republican system was that there were a ton of elected offices, and nobody had too much power just by themselves. So if there was a crazy person who got elected, if somebody who had real problems got into an office, they couldn't do much damage. There were checks and balances. That may sound familiar to you. We got the idea from the frigging Romans. The concept of checks and balances. That's an idea that they invented. Um, but once all the power of all the offices is collected into the hands of the emperor, there are no checks and balances. And if you get someone who's completely banana pants nutso as emperor, things can go very, very bad. So in the 3rd century, a lot of bills came due, you might say. A lot of stuff happened that was bound to happen eventually. Honestly, it's cuckoo that the empire got 200 years, roughly, of stability. Most empires are not that stable. The Romans just kind of lucked out in a lot of ways. But the wheels started to finally come off the bus in just going into the 3rd century. So let's take a look. In 192, the Emperor Commodus, don't laugh, that was his name, Commodus was strangled to death by people who did not like him. And after that, the Praetorian Guard, which is basically the secret service, their job was to protect the emperor. After Commodus died, the Praetorian Guard got in the habit of killing any emperor they didn't like and just picking a new one. Um, so let's unpack that a little bit. Um, the emperor had come to be regarded as pretty much a living god. He had all the power. He could do anything he wanted. And when they strangled Commodus to death, whoever did it, um, it's almost as if people realized, they had a sudden light bulb go off in their head, and they're like, oh, if we don't like the emperor, we can just kill him. right? It's almost like, oh yeah, what was I thinking? We can just kill him. Um, and so after that, it became commonplace for emperors to die at the hands of the very people who were selected to guard the emperor, the Praetorian Guard. Um, as if that wasn't bad enough, in 230 CE, guess who's back? That's right, the Persian Empire. Um, oops, the Persian Empire. Yeah, so you remember the Persian Empire. Way back in the 4th century BCE, the guess who's back? That's right, the Persian Empire. Way back in the 4th century BCE, the Persians had their lunch eaten by Alexander. And as I said in the Roman Republic video, the Roman Republic kind of was able to flourish and grow because the Persian Empire was gone. Because there was no Persian Empire. Because the Persian Empire controlled a huge amount of territory, all the way over to Greece, which is like right next door to Italy. Um, and the Persian Empire would not have allowed Rome to flourish the way that it did in the Mediterranean if they had been around. So now we are, God, 300, 500 years later. A new Persian Empire arises. Persia, remember, is what modern day Iran is. But a new Persian Empire arises, quickly conquers Mesopotamia, and starts trying to conquer the eastern Mediterranean. In other words, it starts trying to conquer territories that are now owned by the Roman Empire, areas that used to be owned by the last Persian Empire. Um, this is going to become kind of a repeating theme in history, where Persia, every few hundred years, Persia will get a bug up its butt and start conquering everything in that region, and it will cause problems. Um, so basically, Persia is jacking up Rome's shit, defeating them in battle, and taking away all their possessions in the east. Um, that is bonkers. We're talking about up until Persia started screwing with them in the mid 3rd century, the Roman army was considered more or less invincible. The Roman army didn't lose fights. Occasionally, there'd be a lost battle here or there. Um, there's a particularly famous one that happened in the Black Forest in Germany, uh, while the Romans were trying to pacify Eastern Gaul. But yeah, overall, for the most part, um, the Roman army was the best army in the world, and they did not lose fights. But suddenly, the Persian Empire is kicking Roman ass. It got so bad that three emperors, were captured by the Persian Empire. Not just like they were killed in battle, they were taken prisoner, and one of them was made to serve as a footstool for the Persian emperor. This guy was the ruler of Rome. He was the emperor of Rome, all powerful. His subjects saw him as the next best thing to a god, and they chained him up and had him serving as a place for the Persian emperor to rest his feet. Um, that's a bit of a come down. Things were not going super well for Rome at this point. Um, Roman provinces were breaking away and declaring their independence. That's going to start happening again later on. But yeah, there were Roman provinces that were like, screw it, we're done with this. We're not listening to Rome anymore. We're just going to become independent. Um, The emperors were getting picked by the army rather than an emperor picking his own successor. The army was deciding who gets to be emperor next. Um, they were getting picked by the army and then killed by the Praetorian Guard, or getting picked by the Senate and getting killed by, let me check my notes, the Praetorian Guard, or getting picked by the Praetorian Guard and getting killed by, let me check my notes again, the Praetorian Guard. It was not super stable. Things were going very badly for Rome in the crisis of the 3rd century. Now, uh, Rome is going to pull itself together in the early 4th century and sort of rally, kind of like, you've had a night out drinking, you're starting to fade a bit, but you drink some water, you go to the bathroom, and you rally. Kind of like that. Rome started to kind of rally a bit in the early 4th century. We'll talk about that more in the next video, or the video where we get to the fall of Rome anyway. Definitely the next video, we'll say. We'll talk about that in the next video. And then, let's see here. What is next? Roman art, and then the collapse of the Roman Empire. So we'll see we'll see things just go for Rome. Their big empire that they built is just going to come unglued, and that's not great. All right. Thank you very much for listening. This is a shorter video, which sort of balances out the video that I did that was like an hour and 40 minutes. But, okay, we got everything we need. Let me double check that. Let me make sure. What is the Pax Romana and its significance? Crisis of the 3rd century. Why did it occur? What did it mean for Rome? Yeah, I think we're good on that. Okay, so rock and roll. Bah.